Well, being Stephen Miller means never having to say you're sorry. After the murder of Alex Preddy on Saturday morning by agents sent to Minneapolis by Donald Trump at Stephen Miller's urging, Stephen Miller decided it was his turn to fire shots at Alex Preddy, and he did. We've all seen the video of the most federal agents ever caught on video calmly walking backwards, backing away from Alex Preddy as they were firing at least 6 additional shots into that motionless body lying face down on the pavement, completely unthreatening to anyone. There is no evidence in any of the videos that the first shot fired at Alex Preddy from inches away from his body was justified. No evidence justifying even the first shot. And it's very likely that that shot fired at such close range killed Alex Preddy. And what is also very clear in the videos about that first shot is that one of the agents had already removed Alex Preddy's licensed handgun from Alex Preddy's right hip, a handgun that Alex Preddy never touched during the incident. All the videos prove that. The videos show one agent reaching down, grabbing that handgun and rushing it away so that every shot fired at Alex Preddy was fired at a completely unarmed man. There is absolutely no conceivable legal justification for any of the shots fired at that unarmed man. The possible human explanation for the shots include panic, abject fear, stupidity, incompetence, recklessness, and indeed viciousness that we have seen displayed by those federal agents in so many situations on those streets. But none of those emotional reasons are legal justifications. Every one of the agents around Alex Preddy's body, every one of them, could fully and easily see the entirety of Alex Preddy's body as they were backing away from him. They could all see what he was doing, and they could all see what he was not doing, meaning he was not moving. And only 2 of the 6 agents in equal positions to fire on Alex Preddy decided that he should be shot. The proof of the illegitimacy and the outright criminality of the shooting of Alex Preddy is the number of agents in exactly the same positions who didn't even reach for their guns because they saw absolutely no reason to reach for a gun because they knew that Alex Preddy never presented a threat to anybody. But those shots kept coming, as many as 10 shots. And always remember in this case that the strongest prosecution evidence about just how unreasonable it was to shoot Alex Preddy is provided by every federal agent there in exactly the same position who did not shoot him, because they all knew that there was nothing threatening to them. They were experiencing exactly the same threat from Alex Preddy, which was no threat at all. And no reasonable human being would ever have fired a shot at Alex Preddy lying face down on that pavement. That's what makes it murder. And Saturday morning, when Stephen Miller heard about it in Washington, he decided now it was his turn. Stephen Miller decided he needed to get his shot in at Alex Preddy. And so he did. Stephen Miller's weapon of choice for his participation in the assassination of Alex Preddy was not a handgun. It was his phone. It was his social media account. With Alex Preddy's parents, Susan and Michael Preddy, and his younger sister, Michaela Preddy, reeling in the pain and the agony of the news of the sudden death of Alex Preddy, Stephen Miller used his social media account to call Alex Preddy, quote, a domestic terrorist. and to describe what Alex Preddy did when he was trying to help a woman who was being illegally assaulted by federal agents as, quote, a domestic terrorist tried to attack federal law enforcement. That was a lie. Stephen Miller said Alex Preddy was trying to assassinate them. That was a lie. Stephen Miller knew that was a lie when he said that. The video was already public, proving that that was a lie. Did Stephen Miller pause to say to himself, maybe I shouldn't try to use this one for propaganda? Maybe there are some suffering parents out there. Maybe there's a suffering little sister out there. Did just a flicker of humanity pass through Stephen Miller's depraved mind as he was willfully typing that lie into his weapon of choice, his phone? The only person working for Donald Trump suspected of being more cruel than Donald Trump is Stephen Miller, and so the answer is no. We have a right to believe that not one humane thought went through Stephen Miller's mind about the man whose character he decided to assassinate after Donald Trump's agents assassinated him. Did Stephen Miller think, I wonder what he does for a living? What if he does something honorable for a living? Is there anything that could happen that could make my declaration that he's a domestic terrorist intent on assassinating federal agents somehow come back to haunt me, Stephen Miller? Of course, the problem is nothing can haunt Stephen Miller. And so reports indicate that Stephen Miller has been having a rough time for the first time in his life in the Trump White House. According to the New York Times, Stephen Miller was shut out of an important meeting Monday night that went on for 2 hours in the Oval Office with Kristi Noem about this very crisis. Kristi Noem, who was undoubtedly pleading her case to Donald Trump about why it wasn't her fault that everything they said about Alex Preddy was a lie, and everything they're doing in Minneapolis has gotten out of control. Stephen Miller was kept out of that meeting, and that makes it extremely likely that Donald Trump was extremely displeased by that time with Stephen Miller's role in this situation. And 24 hours later, Stephen Miller, who has been forced to remain silent, was also forced to put out a written statement. And this is not the kind of thing that Stephen Miller does. Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem like to go on Fox and celebrate their savagery, celebrate their cruelty, and boast about it as loudly and publicly as they can. And Stephen Miller was obviously ordered by Donald Trump to somehow publicly dismantle his lies about Alex Preddy. And so late last night, Stephen Miller put out a written statement. He didn't go on Sean Hannity's show. He didn't go to some Trump-supporting public forum. He wasn't allowed to do that. Didn't go on a podcast. Just put out a written statement. Very un-Stephen Miller-like. Very low-key, very low visibility. The statement Stephen Miller put out doesn't say, I'm sorry. Stephen Miller tries to blame others for his lies that he chose to deliver to this country. His written statement says, the initial statement from the Department of Homeland Security was based on reports from Customs and Border Patrol on the ground. Additionally, the White House provided clear guidance to the Department of Homeland Security that the extra personnel that had been sent to Minnesota for force protection should be used for conducting fugitive operations to create a physical barrier between the arrest teams and the disruptors. We are evaluating why the Border Patrol team may not have been following protocol. It was a Customs and Border Patrol team that murdered Alex Preddy. And now Stephen Miller is saying, they weren't supposed to go there and murder protesters. That wasn't the protocol. They were simply supposed to create arrest teams and protester teams and make it all work together very smoothly. Stephen Miller now says they may not have been following protocol. That's his phrase for murder. And he's right. They were not following any legal protocol on that street at any moment in those videos. And today, the White House decided they had to add a cleanup to Stephen Miller's pathetic attempt to clean up his statement. The White House, continuing its rhetorical retreat, issued this statement about Stephen Miller's retreat. Per his statement, Stephen was specifically referring to general guidance given to ICE that the extra personnel that had been sent to Minnesota was for force protection. It should be used to create a physical barrier between the arrest teams and the disruptors, and officials would be examining why additional force protection assets may not have been present to support the operation. Okay, so officials will not be examining why they committed murder. They'll be examining why they weren't standing where we thought we should have them stand. And so now both Stephen Miller and whoever is putting out the ridiculous statements for the White House cannot come up with a single line in their new statements of defense. Not one word of defense for why the killing of Alex Preddy is not a murder. He's not a domestic terrorist anymore in Stephen Miller's statements. There's no attempt in the new Stephen Miller statement to claim that Alex Preddy was not murdered. There's no defense offered. There's no attempt in the new White House statement to claim that Alex Preddy was not murdered by those agents. There's no attempt to claim the agents were justified in any way. That's because they know they would have to invent evidence that is not in any of the videos to justify the killing of Alex Preddy, which is absolutely not justifiable. Our first guest tonight says that there is, for Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, a political logic for Donald Trump's lawlessness. Tonight, the Trump White House is afraid of publicly advancing that logic. And Stephen Miller is doing his version of an apology. And the Attorney General of the United States went to Minneapolis today and did not make a public appearance there. She simply tweeted that she was there. That is as low profile as any Trump cabinet member has ever been in one of Donald Trump's invasion sites in America. Except, of course, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who is even more low profile today. She's invisible, totally invisible. In the middle of this crisis, she's hiding somewhere, in Washington maybe, and saying nothing, being allowed to say nothing, because Donald Trump has told them all to shut up. Donald Trump and his regime is in retreat tonight. Stephen Miller is in retreat tonight because the protesters are winning. Chris Hayes is doing invaluable reporting from the streets of Minneapolis today, in which he reports that there is no sensation among the people there of a reduction of tensions in Minneapolis at this point, or even a reduction in invasion forces. But remember, there are always two things about Trump world, what they say and what they do. And right now, what they are saying is that they are retreating. Donald Trump is talking about his good phone calls with the governor of Minnesota and with the mayor of Minneapolis, people who he was attacking last week. And Donald Trump is silencing Stephen Miller and keeping him out of the room. He is silencing Kristi Noem. He is silencing his attorney general today on this subject, even though she was in Minneapolis. And so they are in retreat on what they say. And that usually means that their action will follow their rhetoric. They will retreat the invasion forces from Minneapolis in the same way that they retreated from Los Angeles, or in the same way that they retreated from Chicago. They will retreat. This is a week of mourning. It should be a week of national mourning when the federal government guns down law-abiding citizens who believed that they lived in a country where the First Amendment protected them on the streets where they lived, and are now dead because they exercised that belief. Renee Good, Alex Preddy. And in this week of mourning, the National Catholic Reporter writes, quote, Catholics must decide if they serve Donald Trump or the gospel. And the National Catholic Reporter is concerned with a new Catholic, a particular Catholic, James David Vance, who has been a bit of a wanderer in the wilderness of religion in some portions of his life. He changed his name multiple times and changed his religion a few times. It was not long ago that he moved from atheism to Catholicism, possibly for political reasons before becoming a candidate. So he's new at Catholicism, and he might need more guidance now in his new religion, which might become an increasingly uncomfortable religion for him. Because the National Catholic Reporter says Vice President J.D. Vance reposted Stephen Miller, who on X called Preddy an assassin and who tried to murder federal agents, a statement that is not supported by any evidence. Vance then shared President Donald Trump's lengthy and borderline incomprehensible justification of the shooting. As a Catholic, Vance could have chosen to share the gospel message of healing and human dignity. Instead, he chose to offer the MAGA message of division and blame. Vance's comments are, once again, a moral stain on our collective witness of Catholicism. Yesterday, Pastor Raphael Warnock, who is the current occupant of one of the most important pulpits in American history, the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where Martin Luther King was pastor until his death. Senator Warnock went to Minneapolis and said this.
As I stand where Alex Preddy lost his life in a real sense, I feel like I'm standing on holy ground. And the blood spilled on this ground reminds us that we're in a moral moment in our country. And the soul of our nation is at stake. I am a United States Senator, and so I'm committed to blocking funding for ICE. I'll deal with that later this week as I make my way back to Washington. But as a pastor, I just wanted to be present with the people of Minneapolis who are standing up in such a courageous way. They're standing with their neighbors. I think of Renee Good, who literally put her body on the line and paid the ultimate price. Alex Preddy the same. And all of us in their memory are called to stand up in this moment and summon the better angels of our natures, as Lincoln called it, and say no to this evil that is being unleashed onto our streets.
Say no to this evil that is being unleashed on our streets. And the question becomes, how do we say no? Today, the President of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Paul Coakley, issued a statement saying, quote, "The recent killing of 2 people by immigration enforcement officers in Minneapolis and that of a detained man in Texas are just a few of the tragic examples of the violence that represent failures in our society to respect the dignity of every human life. We mourn this loss of life and deplore the indifference and injustice it represents." J.D. Vance would do well to listen to Cardinal Joseph Tobin, the Archbishop of Newark, who has a question for all of us. How will you say no? How will you say no to what Donald Trump is doing, to what Stephen Miller is doing? How will you say no to the cruelty? How will you say no to the lies? How will you say no to the murders?
I think if we are serious about putting our faith in action, we need to say no. Each one of us, and even more importantly, in speaking with others, we'll have to say, how do we say no? Well, in my own faith tradition, I think one way that we say no is that we mourn. We do not celebrate death. And what is probably worse, we do not pretend it doesn't happen. We say names. We pray for the dead. And we mourn for a world, a country that allows 5-year-olds to be legally kidnapped, and protesters to be slaughtered. I'm speaking to you within a couple of miles of 2 major detention centers. And everyday people from many faith communities go to Delaney Street here in Newark and to the Elizabeth Detention Center, and they say no by standing at the gates, by talking with the ICE personnel, by insisting on the rights of the detainees within. They bring them human comfort. They console the families of those who aren't always admitted to see their loved ones. How will you say no? How will you say no to violence? Because as the great teacher Martin Luther King said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. How will you say no? In this week when an appropriations bill is going to be considered in Congress, will you contact your your congressional representatives, the senators and representative from your district? We ask them for the love of God and the love of human beings, which can't be separated. Vote against renewing funding for such a lawless organization. How will you scrawl your answer on the wall? How will you help restore a culture of life in the midst of death? Thank you. God bless you.
How will you say no?